I just want to bring you some more footage from Australia that is going viral, painting our country as some dystopian nightmare where individual rights are not protected and a scared populace submits to a police state. They're not painting a very nice picture of it. Submits to rights are not protected and a scared populace submits to a police state. And a scared populace submits to a police state. They're not painting a very nice picture of Australia, I've got to say. Have a look.
There's little sympathy for anyone ignoring the health orders. Even this group of teenagers caught partying after dark at the bottom of the North Bondi Cliffs. Herded to higher ground by Polaire's spotlight and speaker, the 8 boys were placed in handcuffs and left to explain a $1,000 fine to Mum.
681 penalty infringement notices issued in the last 24 hours. More than 400 of those notices were again for people being outside of their home without a reasonable excuse.
To us, a bunch of teenagers being...
Y'all see that? Shout to gang stalking Australia. He been warning y'all for years of what's about to take place in Australia. And as you can see, it's already in full force. You go outside, you get your ass locked up. And you have to pay a fine.
Being handcuffed in the middle of the night and fined $1,000 each for the crime of meeting at a Sydney beach has become normal. But the rest of the world is looking at that footage, looking at that news coverage with abject horror.
It's getting harder and harder to hide if you're doing the wrong thing, especially in the construction industry. A crackdown following on from the recent shutdown. Workers sent home if their paperwork isn't in check.
It is a struggle, but it's it's just what has to be done. Like, nobody likes telling people to go home. They've all got families to feed.
Our camera's rolling on another random blitz in Marsden Park.
Authorising me under the Public Health Act.
Inspectors have asked these tradesmen to show proof of their QR check-in as well as identification and vaccination records. One of the men here is from Campsie and he doesn't have his documentation, so he's being sent home. He may lose a chunk of his pay too if officers follow through with a fine.
Both those clips were from the same 9 News report, and there was plenty more I could show you from that particular report. That clip has already got millions of views on social media, with people from Scandinavia to South America marvelling at what's happening in Australia. I mentioned top-rating Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson. Here was his latest report on Australia.
Well, here are the numbers. From mid-July until last week, the entire nation of Australia, that's 25 million people, has averaged about 1 week. The entire nation of Australia, that's 25 million people, has averaged about 1.5 COVID deaths per day. Wow. Out of 25 million people. That has been enough to justify the end of Australia and totalitarianism. In one recent case, which really does say it all, authorities executed rescue dogs, shot the dogs to death to prevent Australian dog lovers from traveling to adopt the dogs. Leaving your home is no longer allowed to adopt the dogs. Leaving your home is no longer allowed to adopt the dogs. Leaving your home is no longer allowed. So they just killed the dogs. And the population put up with it. They were told they had to. Nightly news in Australia now looks like a science fiction film.
He wasn't done there. There's more, much more.
One Australian news outlet just reported, and we're quoting, "A tip to Crime Stoppers has blown the lid on a church service attended by 60 adults and children. The gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant," end quote, for going to church. So what else in Australia is now considered, quote, selfish? Gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant, end quote.
Now you see that, y'all? Your church is over, y'all. For all you church goers, your church is over. They got gang stalkers in your church. A tip to Crime Stoppers has blown the lid on a church service at #Blacktown, attended by 60 adults and children. The gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant as cases in the suburb surges. Gang stalkers in the church, snitching.
The gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant, end quote, for going to church. So what else in Australia is now considered, quote, selfish and arrogant? It's not just going to church or leaving your apartment or trying to adopt a dog. Watching the sunset is also selfish and arrogant. Watch.
There's a whole bunch of people down the Ryback Beach last night who thought the best thing to do was to go and watch the sunset. I'm sure it was a beautiful sunset. But that's not in the spirit or in the letter of these rules.
Scolded for watching the sunset, executing rescue dogs, a nationwide manhunt for a guy who sneezed alone in an elevator. No one in Australia is laughing at this. No one can stand back far enough to see the...
Did y'all hear what he said? He said a nationwide manhunt for a man that sneezed in the elevator.
lunacy in Australia-wide manhunt. Scolded for watching the sunset, executing rescue dogs, a nationwide manhunt for a guy who sneezed alone in an elevator.
Alone.
No one in Australia is laughing.
Alone. A man sneezed alone in the elevator, and they did a nationwide manhunt to hunt that man down, just to say he was sick.
At this, no one can stand back far enough to see the lunacy on display. They're too far gone. Rescue dogs, a nationwide manhunt for a guy who sneezed alone in an elevator. No one in Australia is laughing at this. No one can stand back far enough to see the lunacy on display. They're too far gone.
That's crazy.
And then Tucker took aim at how our police force treat protesters. Now, these protesters have been maligned to the point of being dehumanised by much of the Australian media. But that's not how many overseas see it.
This is Saturday, y'all, Australia. Are y'all ready for this? Look at the signs of police. Look at it's a police rescue. Police state, baby.
If that were Iran, if that footage was shot in Tehran over the weekend, we'd all tug our chins and say, of course, the mullahs, they're not like us. But it's not Iran, it's not North Korea, it's Australia, what we thought was a rules-based society. What law did I break? You heard the protester ask as he's being beaten and handcuffed.
Then commentator Matt Walsh joined in the discussion, mocking Australia and what we have become.
When it comes to Australia, there is a sort of there's something poetic about seeing the country come full circle and back around to being a prison colony again, which is basically what it is there. And I think when we around to being a prison colony again, which is basically what it is there, the country come full circle and back around to being a prison colony again, which is basically what it is there. And I think when we look at that, what we see, as you pointed out, that if the people will tolerate it, then the people in charge of the country will do it.
Right.
And
right.
Then, as you pointed out, that if the people will tolerate it, then the people in charge of the country will do it.
You see that?
And
as long as the people tolerate the bullshit, the elites will continue to do it. And this is the reason why we in the world, we in the situation that we're in right now. Because motherfuckers rather gang stalk and shit and get the easy couple of dollars instead of finding out what's really going on in the world and find out what you are participating in.
That discussion continued. You might want to check it out yourself. Again, doesn't paint us in the best light. There's similar commentary and discussions I've seen from the UK, and this is not how we want to be perceived as a country. We don't want to be seen as scared, submissive, and isolated from the world.
See, that's what we are.